Hey guys, my front speaker started cutting out randomly while I'm driving, so in this video I'll show you how I fixed it. Here are the tools and materials I'll be using. For materials, all that's needed is some 16 to 14 gauge butt connectors and 16 gauge copper wire. A soldering iron is required, some trim tools to remove the door panel, and various tools to cut and strip wire. I started by fading the sound all the way to the speaker having the problem, in my case the front left. And the sound is playing okay now, but I know that it cuts out while I drive, so I'm gonna diagnose the problem by removing the tweeter first to check the connection. Unclip the tweeter by pulling it out. And there are two clips on the left and right side here. I'll press both of them in the same time and pull the tweeter off. And press the release clip on the side of the connector and pull the connector out. So the wires here look good, I don't see any corrosion, which means that the problem is likely at the connector that goes directly into the speaker. Next, I'm going to remove the door panel to get to the speaker connector. I will have the video how to remove the door panel linked up in the cards. Now check the connector, I'm going to wiggle the wires. And the sound is cutting in and out, so now I know that the problem is caused by this connector. So I'm going to remove it and check for corrosion. I'll push the tab on the side to release it and pull the connector up at the same time. While I was removing it, one of the wires came right out of the connector, and it looks like it has completely disintegrated inside the pin. This is aluminum wiring, so when it corrodes it just turns into powder. I'm going to fix this by removing the pins out of the connector. I will solder new copper wire to the pins and connect the copper wire to the aluminum wire using butt connectors. To open up this connector, the locking clip on the side has to be removed. I'm using a point tool, but a micro screwdriver should also work. This clip is very fragile, so make sure not to pull too hard. Once it's out halfway, use a pair of pliers to pull it. This helps to prevent breaking it. So I'm continuing the video on the right side connector now. I already fixed the left side, but some of the video came out blurry. Alright, so now I'm going to take the metal pins out. This pin is clipped in by the plastic on top of it. So to release it, I'll put in a flat screwdriver through the end of the connector and slip it in between the metal pin and the plastic above it. Now push the pin out from the connector end with another small screwdriver. The pin went down a little bit, which means it's unclipped, and now I can take the screwdriver out, and the wire should come right out. If the wire is broken, the pin can be pulled with a pair of pliers. To release the second pin, there's a small clip pressing against it that has to be pushed away from the pin to release it. So I'm going to put the screwdriver in and hold it against the clip until it reaches the end, and then turn the screwdriver to push the clip away from the pin, and the pin should release. Make sure to note the wiring colors to connect them back the same way they were before. On both of the front speakers, the pink and white wire is closest to the release clip. Now I'll open up the protective tubing a bit so I can get access to more wire. In my case, the aluminum wire was corroded a few inches above the connector, so I cut off about 2 inches from the end of the wire and it was nice and clean. Now I'm going to pull the pin off. The connection on this side was still pretty good, but given how bad the other side was, I'd rather not have to do this a few years later. Alright, so now I'm gonna add this piece of copper wire between the connector pin and the aluminum wire. I'll strip a small bit of insulation off the end, about 1/8 of an inch, put the wire in the pin, and carefully close the end of the pin on the wire. Here's what it should look like once it's done. Next, I'll solder the wire on the pin to make the connection strong. I have my soldering gun warmed up, and I'm going to heat the connector for a few seconds and touch the solder to the connector. Now I'm going to wait for it to cool down and give it a tug to make sure it's soldered on properly. I'll close up the end of this pin just a tiny bit to make sure that it goes on tight. It's very easy to damage it if you press too hard, so I'm being very careful. This will make sure that the connection is not loose. And now I'll brush on some dielectric grease to prevent future corrosion. Now I can insert the pin back in the connector and check that it has reached the bottom. So that looks good, the pin is all the way in. And now I'll strip one more piece of wire and connect it to the other pin. When soldering, make sure to get the pin hot and apply the solder to the pin, not to the soldering gun tip. Also, too much solder will prevent the pin from fitting in the connector, so very little solder must be used. I put on a little bit too much here, so I'm just gonna flatten it out. Let's see if this fits. And it went in perfectly. Now I'll push the locking clip back on the side of the connector. Cut both wires to the same size and strip the wires just enough to fit halfway in the butt connector. Now I'll put the connectors on, just slide it on top of the wire and squeeze it closed. I'm using the back of my pliers to squeeze the connector, which is just barely working, so I recommend using the proper crimper for this. I'll have the link to it down in the video description. So that's good enough. I'm gonna give it a tug and make sure it's tight. And let's do the other one. Again, I have about 1/4 inch stripped off the end of the wire, which is half the midsection of the butt connector. Put it on and squeeze it down, making sure to only squeeze the half of the connector where the wire's in. And give it a test. And it's good. Now I'll wrap the wires with electrical tape for protection. And now the connector is ready to go back on the car. This is optional. I'm going to put some heat shrink on top of these connectors to prevent moisture from getting to the aluminum wire. I'm going to insert a piece of heat shrink above each connector before I connect them. Now I'll strip both ends about 1/4 inch. And I'll connect the pink-purple wire to the pin that it used to go into. And squeeze it down. Test that it's tight. And it's good. And now connect the other one. And squeeze it down. Now I'll pull the heat shrink over the connectors and shrink it. So this looks good. Now I'll cover it with electrical tape. I have it all taped up and ready to go in. I'm just gonna put a little bit of dielectric grease in the speaker connector. Now I'll push the connector back in the speaker and wiggle the wires to test the connection. So this connection's nice and strong. It should last a long time now because copper doesn't corrode like aluminum does. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. I'll be posting more car and home repair videos in the future. Thanks for watching!